I grew up in a household that wasn't really very politically active. And so when I started to learn about the Palestinian cause, I was about 16 or 17 years old, quite young, and just immersed myself in the cause of Palestine and the plight of Palestinians. I'm a Palestinian myself. And so I had just continually been working on the issue of Palestine as an activist, a student activist. In my later years, when I was, after I was no longer a student, but more along the path of law school, still quite active, spent summers in Palestine working at human rights organizations. And one summer I got a call by one of the organizations I had been interning for, saying that they were looking for lawyers to work on the Palestinian negotiating team, and would I be willing. I was taken aback. I was still quite young, relatively young lawyer, new, and so I wasn't really sure if it was something that I was up to. I declined the first year. And then a year later, again another call came saying, we're still looking for some lawyers, and you've got a lot more experience than you think you do. Would you be willing to spend a year? And after some very long discussions with friends, with family, with some mentors, they said, try it. It'll be like a year of doing good work for your country. So I left. I left the United States, moved to the West Bank, under the belief that I'd be there for a year. A year turned into 2, turned into 3, turned into 4. And by my third year there, I managed to get the attention of the now president. He liked me and asked me to join his staff. So it was a combination of luck, being in the right place at the right time, and people believing in me. I went there with a great deal of both. I was both humble and a little bit arrogant, thinking that this whole problem is just going to be resolved by lawyers, and I know everything that there is to know about this conflict. When I got there, it was a very, very different reality from that which I had studied. Nothing in my Canadian upbringing had prepared me for life under occupation. Nothing has, and nothing ever will. It was, as much as I had read about it, I still didn't know what it was like not to be free. I had never experienced checkpoints. I'd never experienced bombings or military campaigns. I'd never experienced this great disconnect between peoples living on one small piece of land. So it was really quite an eye-opener for me. The other part of it was that when I got there, one of the things that I really set out to do was also to try to educate Israelis, because I thought if I as a Canadian Palestinian didn't know about all the things that Palestinians were living under, for sure Israelis didn't. And so I embarked on a kind of an outreach program, which was unique. It was the only one of its kind at the time, to try to educate Israelis about the occupation, going from house to house, anywhere anybody invited me, and just explain to them about the occupation. And so I got much more insight about anything, about the entire conflict, more so than I could ever read. If I spent a year's time reading every single book, I would have never gotten the same insight I got living there. The peace process is failing and will continue to fail, unfortunately. And I think that it's failing because the two sides are negotiating on two very different ways. Let me back up just a second. The world has put forward fantastic laws to be able to govern occupation. So when there is an occupation, there are specific rules in terms of how a country that's occupying another is supposed to behave. Like houses are not supposed to be demolished. People aren't supposed to be deported. Settlements aren't to be established. All these things are set up under international law. The problem with international law is that there's no way of actually ending an occupation. So they've never created the rules as to how to end an occupation. So in comes the peace process. The idea behind the peace process was, given that there is no body of rules on how to end an occupation, just how to govern an occupation, the best way, it was so thought, was to have negotiations between the two sides. But the problem with the negotiations, and this is why it's failed and will continue to fail, is that you've got two different standards of negotiations. You've got the Palestinian side, which is the side that I was working for, that is insistent upon international law and the application and adherence of international law. And then you have the Israeli side, which says law doesn't matter, and what should matter instead is power. And given that we're the more powerful party, what we say should go. So you have this disconnect between the way that the negotiations are taking place, and it will always be there. On the one hand, you have Palestinians saying international law, international law, international law. And on the other hand, you've got the Israelis saying, who cares about the law? Let's just be practical. Let's use power negotiations. Without a third party to balance that out, to balance out the inequality, without a third party to bridge those gaps, then the peace process is going to fail. And this is why we've seen it fail all of these years. The best thing to say would be just imagine your life and imagine it not your life, kind of flipped on its head. It's hard to describe what it's like not to live under freedom, but I'll try to do my best. It's the inability for some of my students when I was teaching at one of the universities in the West Bank. It was the inability to get to class on a daily basis, not because they didn't want to go to class, but because there were checkpoints. The insecurity that the house that you live in might be demolished, the insecurity that your loved ones might be deported, the insecurity that the land that you own might be confiscated to build a settlement, the insecurity that you may be killed or your loved ones may be killed or detained. You know, about 20% of the Palestinian population has been at one point imprisoned. The insecurity that your children are not safe. So it's a combination of insecurity and lack of freedom that is really difficult to describe unless you've actually lived there, unless you've seen what it's like to be harassed at a checkpoint with absolutely there's complete immunity for soldiers. There's nobody who goes after them. There's no way of complaining. There's no way of ever really having a government that cares about your needs and that is there to protect you as they should be doing. So that's, I think, the best way that I would describe it. What drew me to the Balfour Center was I wanted to spend a little bit of time away from Palestine. Living there makes you go crazy after a while. It's very difficult, especially for somebody raised in the West who, as I said, can't get used to this denial of freedom. The Balfour Center had a combination of being able to work on public policy issues and work on the Middle East, which is something that I definitely wanted, and being able to be positioned at Harvard with all of the wonderful resources, faculty, students, individuals, otherwise, was really what drew me to the program. The Dubai Initiative is unique in that it brings together academics, practitioners, people who are more established in their careers, people who are less established in their careers, from a wide array of practices and fields, and brings them together under the Balfour Center, which allows for a fantastic exchange of information and quite thought-provoking. It's changed me because being able to step back and being able to meet people of very different backgrounds, have access to fantastic resources and faculty and otherwise, and being able to really collaborate on a number of different ideas has been very, very helpful for me. I don't know where I'll go back. I might go back to Palestine, I'm not sure. But if I do, I'll definitely feel much more enriched.